This episode of Recording Studio Rockstars is brought to you by iZotope, Native Instruments, Roswell Pro Audio, and Atom Audio. You're hearing my voice right now through the beautiful Roswell Pro Audio Aztec tube microphone, mixed through iZotope, Ozone, RX, and Neutron, all on Atom Audio monitors and headphones. Please check out our awesome sponsors using the links in the show notes. Also, please remember to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel, because it's a great way for you to help support this show. Now get ready to rock.
The cool thing about Ableton is when you're making your first mock-up arrangement, you can play the arrangement like an instrument as well. By launching all these clips, you're basically just like preparing them. You can quantize them to start on the bar. And even if you have a push, you can, again, not look at the screen, just have it in front of you. You've got your labels and you can just kind of play around with the arrangement, putting things in, putting things out. You're like, oh, I like that.
Welcome to Recording Studio Rockstars. I'm Lid Shaw, and this is the podcast created to help you become a rock star of the recording studio. Native Instruments introduces the new Complete 15 bundle, featuring Contact 8, offering versatile synths, sampled instruments, and innovative effects. Perfect for creating everything from emotional scores to dance floor grooves. Contact 8 includes exciting new creative tools like chords and phrases for inspiration, the Leap tool for dynamic looping, and Conflux, a hybrid instrument blending organic and synth sounds. The Complete 15 bundle also includes updated Massive X and Guitar Rig 7 Pro and AI-enhanced iZotope Ozone 11. Use the code ROCK10 for 10% off at nativeinstruments.com. Howdy, Rockstars. It's your host, Lid Shaw, and welcome back to Recording Studio Rockstars, bringing you into the studio to learn from recording professionals so that you can make your best record ever and be a rock star of the studio yourself. My guest today is Andrei Eremin, a music producer, recording, mixing, and mastering engineer whose work is Grammy-nominated, ARIA award-winning, and has amassed over 8 billion streams to date. That's a lot of streams. Since getting his start at Deluxe Mastering in Melbourne, Australia, Andrei has worked on releases by Hiatus Kaiyote, Tash Sultana, G-Flip, Sampa the Great, Chet Faker, and many others, quickly developing a reputation as one of the most in-demand engineers in Australia. Since then, Andrei has diversified his craft, producing an eponymous EP, a pseudonymous mixtape, records for other artists, including Closure and Moscow's third album, Soft Hell, as well as mastering Tones and Eyes, runaway hit Dance Monkey, and mixing Baker Boy's debut album, Gela, which personally earned him an ARIA award in 2022 for Best Mixed Album. Big thank you to Mark Allen at Vitalik Noise Management in Los Angeles for making our introduction. Please welcome Andrei Eremin to Recording Studio Rockstars. Andrei, my friend, are you ready to rock, dude?
I'm ready. Thank you.
Good to have you here.
Good to be here. I really appreciate you having me on, and yeah, look forward to it.
Dude, it's great to have you here on the show, man. It's really fun to meet you and to go through your discography and listen to your records, which sound really awesome. Rockstars, of course, we have a link in the show notes to Andrei's work and the records and the music that he's mixing, producing, mastering. So I highly encourage you to go, scroll down, at some point, either while you're listening to this and we mention a record, or afterwards, to just go listen to his work. So welcome, dude. Where are you joining us from right now?
Thank you. I'm in Philly. I've been down here for a year and a half now. Just moved from Australia before that, and this is where I call home. It's good.
Right. That's like home of a lot of soul music, coming from the Philly. Yeah. Philly's got a great history for music.
It does. And there's a great like indie rock kind of scene happening at the moment as well. Lots of underground DIY bands, a lot of fun stuff being made. It's cool. It's a really good place to be.
Yeah, and then the Delaware area too. Nick Krill has been on the show recently. He's somebody you should probably meet. I think you guys are making records that would go really well together. But
Yeah.
there's some great music scene from that part of the world for sure.
Great.
So tell us a little bit about, now you came from Australia to kind of settle in Philly.
Mhm.
Did you set up, well, we got lots to talk about. I mean, you have a studio that is pretty insane that you just finished building, and then you just up and said, okay, I'm leaving to another country. Tell us the story behind your studio back in Melbourne
Yeah,
and getting settled in Philadelphia and what brought you here.
for sure. Yeah, it is kind of a funny story that doesn't make a lot of sense out of context. But essentially, when you're moving to America and you've got a studio set up, there's one of like three ways you can go about it. You can bring it all with you, which is, put it all in a shipping container, set it out in a cargo ship, and hopefully it comes a few months later. And at the time before the pandemic, that would have set you back about $2,000. I tried to move during the pandemic, and it suddenly skyrocketed to $20,000.
Wow.
So all of a sudden, that was off the cards, and that was if it got unloaded off the ships at all.
Yeah.
You can leave a studio back where you're from, which is obviously what I ended up doing, or you can sell it all and start again. But one thing just kind of led to another. It was an opportune moment. It was in the middle of the pandemic. That was always kind of my plan, was to have a studio in Australia that ticked over while I was gone, and then kind of just work out what I'm doing here separately. And I don't know how much you know about how the pandemic went down in Australia, but Melbourne in particular had some very crazy lockdown laws.
Yeah. I was definitely catching a glimpse of what the crazy stuff that was going on down there.
Yeah. It was grim. We were allowed out for an hour a day for weeks at a time. And
wow.
we had this like tally where they were trying to push zero COVID, and every time it got to one, you all got sent back inside for another week or however long it was. But anyway.
I'm almost certain I would have just ended up, in jail or in trouble if that was me in my situation.
Yeah, I don't know how we all got through it, but coincidentally,
well, I'm glad you're here now, man. And you, the studio that you're going to tell us about right now that you left behind in Melbourne is quite a remarkable. It's a remarkable thing. I'll preface it by saying it's on top of a building, and it's inside something that you wouldn't typically expect to see on top of a building. So tell us about your studio.
Yeah, well, basically, I saw so it's in a train on top of a building. If you want to know how the trains got up there, a big crane and lots of good luck. It was like a 3-day ordeal where they had to wait for the wind to die down and hike up these old what do you call it? They're just out of service. They're like discontinued from use. And so
it's sort of like were they sort of subway trains, or were they like, here in the US we have like double-decker Amtrak trains, and it wasn't quite that big, right? It's not a double-decker sort of thing. It's more like a bus. Yeah. The body of a city bus sort of thing.
It's pretty much, if you think about like those kind of converted bus studios that people do, it's actually roughly the same size. It's a little bigger than that.
Yeah.
And we do like above ground, below ground combo. It's subway and above ground. So it was one of those.
They literally lifted it up and just parked it on top of the roof of a building. Yeah. And it looks like there's a few of them up there, right?
Yeah, there's three whole carriages. The building they made from scratch is obviously part of the design of it. So it's a very solid concrete foundation. Yeah. There were basically just like lots of like really cool, unique things about it that allowed me to kind of do like the dollar store version of a real studio setup.
Yeah.
Like for instance, like my floating floors were the rails that it was on, because it's still got all of the the metal undercarriage isolating it from the ground. Below that, I have like a meter of concrete to support all the carriages. So I have great isolation with my neighbors. And then the shape of it was just a great coincidence, because it's all non-symmetrical. It's kind of tunnel shaped, and the walls kind of go out in a little bit of a parallelogram angle.
Yeah.
And it just I went in there just to check it out because the trains, I should say, the trains had been there for 10 years. It was my idea to just turn it into a studio. When I went and checked it out, I get in there, I have a clap around, see what the acoustics are like, and it was good. There were like no modes I could pick up on, no obvious ones. It was really deep. It goes 10 meters back because it's a carriage.
Wow,
It's
10
half a
meters. So
carriage.
that's very long. So that does give you some room for the bass to develop.
Yeah, and it just there was a lot of um like wishful thinking involved. Like I couldn't really do room calculations because I don't think there's software around that could do those calculations with that many variables.
Yeah.
So we just kind of went for a punt on it. And when I put my speakers in on day one after we went and fitted it out properly, it sounded really good. And yeah, just
So it's
miraculous.
so it's narrow and long. Do you feel like the walls on either side of you feel close together? Like if you set up a drum kit in there, does it feel easy enough to walk past the drums and the mics, or does it more like put the drums on the far end of the studio kind of thing?
I definitely designed it in a way. So everything, like, you ever seen those tiny home videos where people have like little pockets for everything to try and make a small space livable?
Yeah.
I definitely approached the studio with that in mind. So the way it's set out is you have this middle area and the seating on either side of it, but a lot of it is just empty space because there's not a lot of space and everything's tucked off into little corners and things. So you can put a drum kit in there. It acoustically is like, I'd made it quite dead as well.
Yeah,
I like
think
dead
that'd be
rooms.
the thing to do too.
Yeah, I feel like it would be a bit too chaotic if it was live in there, but I wanted to try and get something where you could be comfortable recording like a vocal in the control room sort of vibe.
Yeah.
So if you can put a kit in there, it would just be a dead kit. It'd be like, if you're making a hip hop or a soul record, probably sound good. Big rock record, probably wouldn't do it. But yeah, it can be done.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting because so a couple of thoughts. One is my Bonnaroo studio that I did here was quickly assembled. We'd stuff a full band into the basically it's a double wide trailer, and on one end was an office that gets converted into a radio interview booth. On the other end was an office that we would convert into a control room, and then in the middle is just sort of a big room where all the band would go. And it's ultimately like your train car studio. It's probably similar shape and size a little bit, but it's we would just deaden everything, and it worked surprisingly well, and in a lot of ways we got some better sounds in there than I get in studio spaces where there's more room to breathe and there's more chaos. It can be really kind of nice to have things tight and controlled.
Yeah.
And I've done some sessions too. I remember the first time we were at Electrical Audio, Steve Albini's studio in Chicago, and we were recording drums, and they had a dead room called Alcatraz, and then they had a mid-sized room called Kentucky and a live room called Centerfield that was really huge. So we were able to set up drums in all three spaces and try them out. And it was really interesting to me to hear how limiting doing dead drums was for rock records. They sounded really cool, but like you're saying, for a rock album, it's like the drums kind of need that liveness and room to breathe. In the huge room in center field, the walls weren't close enough, but in Kentucky, which was the mid-sized room, it's sort of like perfect because the drums can rock out, it bounces back off the walls and it reinforces it. But I bet, did you record some drums in there too, or did you not really ever mess with that and just sort of focus more on overdubs and vocals and things and mixing?
It was mostly overdubs. I didn't spend a whole lot of time in there before I had to leave. I had basically like a year where I was ironing out all the kinks and everything and making sure that my setup was as dialed in as it ever could be. So we did some recordings in there. There's one track on an album that I was producing in there, the Closure in Moscow album. The final track is one of those one take guitar and vocalist in the same room kind of deals, and we did all that in there, and it sounded really special, I think.
That's cool.
But yeah, no kits yet. Hopefully one day when I go back.
Yeah. Well, I imagine doing, simple drums could sound really cool in there. Just get like a really tight. I mean, I love the sound of drums in a dead room. Just get a super gated, ultra compressed kick and snare, and sort of a fun. Things sound like samples when you play them.
Totally. Yeah.
So let's see what else. Now, looking at the pictures, and we have a link in the show notes, Rockstar. So click through and go look at that, because the images of this Carriage studio, and that's what it's called, right? Carriage Studio.
Yep, that's it.
Super cool looking. And there's like, when you see the outside shot of the front of the building, it's like straight out of Blade Runner or something like that. It completely looks like a bizarre AI generated utopian cityscape, cool vibe. You're like, what's going on, But then some of the inside pictures, you got a bunch of those too. And it looks like you're sitting up in the front, like control, the driver portion of this train, where you can mix and you're just looking out the windows. And it looks like the window that you're looking out of, are you actually literally like cantilevered over the edge of the building a little bit? Like a little bit, yeah. Like a deck.
It's a little unnerving. It's a little bit of it is an illusion. There's like the balcony below you if you did want to lean over the edge, and they're at the edge. But yeah, on the other side of the building, one of the trains is like this far from literally the edge of the building, and it freaks me out. I don't know how. Like it's a burger restaurant. You can go eat a burger there. You can sit by the window, and if you look out the window, you're on the edge of the building. It's surreal.
Oh yeah, we have one like that here in Nashville. There's a super tall hotel, and then it has sort of like this same thing, a cantilevered restaurant, 11 stories up, which actually doesn't sound that high, but when you're on it, maybe it's even higher than that. Maybe it's 17 or something. I don't know. But when you go and you sit on this deck and the weather's nice, you're sitting at a table. And right to your left is, or to my left when I was sitting there, is the railing, but it's just glass. So you're just looking. You look over, and there's just glass, and you're just looking 11 stories straight down off the edge of this high up. I think it's a JW Marriott, and it really freaked me out.
Yeah.
You get, I guess, if you go up there for drinks, you got to be careful when you get up from your table.
Yeah.
Totally. So that's cool, man. Well, so did you, so you got to do a little bit of record making in there, and then you decided it was time to come here, and start. So you started over with a studio setting in your house, like a home studio setup?
Yeah, that's what I'm doing at the moment. Because Philly's not necessarily a permanent thing for me. It's where I'm living at the moment, but I'm kind of using this time to use other people's studios. Also, because I just feel like I want more experience in everyone's studios anyway before I build the one here that I really want to do. So it's just good to like get out and meet a bunch of people, use a bunch of great gear, and kind of use it as an excuse to travel. So home studio for now.
Maybe it was Hiatus Kaiyote, one of the artists in your playlist, because you had so much. Your playlist is massive. There's a ton of records in there, and they're all very cool sounding. But I think Hiatus sounded. Some of it sounds programmed, and some of it sounds like a really talented, fusion, jazz, interpretive kind of fusion pop band. Am I remembering that correctly? And
Absolutely.
The reason I'm bringing it up is because it makes me think, when I'm listening to that, I'm like, they must have recorded, some of these records must be recorded in a studio and then brought into you. Either you're mixing it, or maybe you guys are going to another studio to record a full band setting.
Yeah, they do a lot of it themselves. I'm really into their approach to the way they've made their records. And I should preface, I just mastered their second album, and I mastered their upcoming. I say upcoming, it'll be out by the time this podcast airs, but they have a fourth album. But
okay,
yeah,
cool.
I've known the guys for ages. And
so like Everything's Beautiful and Make Friends, those tracks were mastering
those are
projects?
the new ones. Yeah.
Cool. They sound great. At Isotope, tone shaping is topping the charts. Meet the Catalyst series, Plasma, Aurora, and Cascadia. Plasma's flux saturation technology brings dynamic warmth and depth to your mix. Aurora takes spatial audio to new heights with lush adaptive reverb, while Cascadia adds exciting delays to your mix, retaining clarity through its smart unmasking feature. Get 10% off Plasma, Aurora, Cascadia, or any of the Isotope plugins with the special code ROCK10 and make your mixes rock at isotope.com.
Thank you. Yeah, they have gone through a bunch of different studios that they make for themselves. Their second album, I recall, they were in, I think, like a converted house. It was like they turned the basement of their house into a studio and did, I think, pretty much everything there. This one they've been working on out of a new studio that was actually, I think, designed by the same guy who helped me put together Carriage, which is awesome. But I don't know for sure, so don't quote me on that. But they do a lot of it themselves. They do the mixing themselves and the production themselves. On this one, actually, I digress. They mixed everything themselves up until this album, and then this album was forget his name, but he did a lot of the great classic Beastie Boy records. You might know better than me.
Oh, who mixed it? You said?
Yeah.
I'll look that up. I mean the Dust Brothers. Oh no, Beastie Boys. Sorry, not Beck. Yeah, well, I'll Google it while you keep going. We'll do some live Googling on this while we go.
He mixed it this time around, but yeah, I'm all those members of the band are all crazy talented musicians. They all come from a jazz background, I believe.
It wasn't Mixmaster Mike, was it? I think he was part of the band DJ.
And then Perrin, the drummer, he's also a really talented producer as well. So he makes music under the name Clever Austin. And he would be responsible for a lot of the electronic elements that you hear in there. Him and
it sounds
Simon, the
like
synth player.
One of the things that's cool about your discography and cool about like that artist in particular is you guys blur the lines between, is this live band performance? Is this programmed? I feel like I'm in this universe listening to it and I'm not sure where I am. You know, it's like, I don't know if I'm in it doesn't, if I go listen to like, classic band records, you're like, clearly you're in a room with the band that you hear this drums, bass, guitars and stuff like that. But this stuff is a little bit more, I could be in a spaceship.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really fun. I go back and forth between the two approaches because part of me wants to make those really great band in a room records, but it's also, there's just so many tools available to you now to create sounds that, are only limited by your imagination, that there's so much of a gray area there where you can put things in a spaceship. A little bit of both. I like both.
Well, that's good to hear you say that. I definitely want to talk to you about all those things. I actually am I've played around with it plenty over the years, but I've finally decided it's time for me to deep dive my way into Ableton Live.
Ooh,
and I'm curious whether Ableton is a big part of your world and the world of artists like Hiatus Kaiyote and some of the other ones you work with. Is that a fair question? Do you feel like the answer is you gotta dabble in all the tools?
I think you just go with whatever works for the way your brain works, I think. But Ableton for sure is a big part of my workflow. It's what I prefer for it just turns composing music on a computer back into an instrument again. It feels like you're playing an instrument, and that is just so helpful for unlocking creativity. Like I'm just seeing the grid, like the standard DAW grid that we've all been seeing for the last 30, 40, 50 years, however many since DAW started. It is just not a terribly inspiring place to be, but Ableton allows you to kind of just come up with ideas really quickly, kind of remix them on the fly, and it's really important for certain styles. I don't know if Hiatus use it. I think they might be Logic, or don't know for sure, but certainly I would say Ableton's probably used more than any other DAW out of all the people I work with, which is kind of crazy to think about.
Well, what's interesting to me about that and messing around with some of the different DAWs too is discovering that, for me, I think they each have a little bit of a sound. I know you probably, if I say that in a forum, some smarty pants will beat me up and like, that's stupid. That can't be true. It's all digital, whatever. But every time I play around with them, like what it spits out, as long as I don't get in the way too much, sounds different to me in cool ways. And it could be a lot of things. It could be the sounds that you get to start with. It could be the sound of it. But I do think Ableton, I remember at one point discovering that if you just push the mix up as hot as it'll go until you see like total redlining at the mix output, I was like, it still sounds great, Wonder why that is. Have you noticed stuff like that? Have you noticed it having any sort of a sound that sounds different to you than other platforms?
A little bit. I will say I would probably be one of the forum people because I did a null test like 10 years ago on all the DAWs and they all canceled out. Yeah.
But they did cancel out?
They did all cancel out. But I do think that there's like cumulative lots of little decisions in the way the software is presented that makes you make things sound a certain way.
Yeah.
So it's like there is some magic there where they all do have their own sound and just kind of like manifests itself in different ways. Yeah. Ableton definitely, when I first got into Ableton, I actually struggled with it a lot because a lot of their warp modes would do all sorts of like aliasing filtering on the top end. So a lot of like when I was first working with producers like 10, 15 years ago, I would be just changing the warp algorithm so that I kind of had some transient still left. So there were little things like that baked into it. It also has it has a different volume fade, I'm pretty sure. If you do a straight fade down, it's like exponential or something. I don't know
you mean just when you do a fade out on a clip or something?
Yeah. I think something like that happens internally. Or maybe it's just presented in a different way, but that could be bullshit.
No, that makes sense. I mean, Pro Tools is the one that I know the most. And, you've got a variety of fades and a lot of the things that I'm constantly running into stuff where what I think of as what it does, it turns out it's just the default and I can set it to any of the other options if I just knew that I was supposed to go into the preference and do that. I think I was in a forum recently talking about making a suggestion for Pro Tools. It would really be great if it did these things. And then I get a text from a buddy of mine. He was like, hey man, I saw what you posted in there. He's like, did you know that if you just do these button commands, it already does that? And I was like, no. And I've been using it since, like the early 90s.
Yeah. So, I mean, these programs are so big. I still don't. So Cubase is my main driver for mixing and mastering, and I still don't know all of it. There are things in there that are still surprises to me every year.
Have you crossed paths with Chris Salim over at Mixdown Online? He's got his YouTube channel is entirely focused on Cubase.
Oh, nice. No, I haven't. I'll have to check it out. That sounds awesome.
He's a good dude. All right, so let's see here. What do I want to ask you about? I want to talk to you. I want to keep talking about Ableton for just a moment, or at least your process when you talk about letting the computer feel like an instrument again. Do you find that it feels that way to you and it's just you and a laptop? Do you find that it feels that way to you when you set up your studio and you have the right kind of MIDI controllers in front of you? Talk a little bit about that. Like, what are the things that let you get into a comfort zone and feel like it's an instrument and it's musical versus sort of stiff and awkward?
Yeah, I think it all helps. I guess it's like the way, controllers aside, I think it's like the way that you approach the software is what makes it feel like everything's kind of like a fun exploration. The way they designed it, it doesn't feel like there are any rules. There's like no way that you have to route things a certain way. It's all just kind of there and you can kind of improvise the whole thing. And that's kind of like what's made music develop in such a way in the last 10 years is I think people are just improvising the whole thing. It's great. There's all these new possibilities there. I don't know. I'll say I feel uncomfortable if it's just me and my laptop. I need to have a controller of some sort, or at least like some intention. Like I don't really like, using the keyboard as my MIDI controller. Exactly. That's
so let me jump in with this. So which instrument do you wish you had the controller for more? Is it the drum groove, or is it more like the melodic lines, the bass and the key part, and
It's kind of everything. Yeah. It's kind of everything. I definitely need pads if I'm playing out drums because
Yeah.
velocity is a big thing. And
Okay.
you can draw in velocity, but it's not like a fun day in the office, It's like you're really just getting it done. And then it's all the kind of like, I guess for me personally, I like a lot of the human element of music. So do we all. But I spend a lot of time kind of drawing the human element back in if it's just me with a fixed velocity, computer keyboard.
Right, because so in what you're referring to, Rockstar's what he's referring to is you can enable your QWERTY keyboard on the computer to be the MIDI notes, the piano. I think it's like 1 octave C to C or something, right? So you can play stuff in that way, but of course it's going to be fixed velocity. It's just going to be one level.
Yeah. So I do find you having controllers is really important. Just have good stuff going in. And to me, that's just like a much more inspiring way to work. And then everything beyond that point is where Ableton becomes an instrument for me, I think. Push is really good too. I don't know if you've gotten into that yet, the Ableton Push.
I have a good friend who was trying to convince me, 15 years ago that I needed to be getting Push. I never did. But it's what about Push enhances your workflow? Because I think for people who don't use it, we look at it and we're like, so first of all, what is it? So the rock stars know. And second of all, it's like when we look at it, we're like, is that a DJ controller? Is that a keyboard style thing? Is it like how do you think about it?
Yeah, I just think of it as its own standalone instrument. So Ableton Push is it's a device that ships alongside Ableton should you want it. They build it in-house. I think Akai used to build it, and then now they've got their own process for it. It's got, I think, 64 pads, just small ones, but it allows you to play, melodic, harmonic lines, drums, everything. It allows you to sequence. It's basically all of the big features of the DAW can be done on the Push. And what I think is really cool about it is, especially with the new one, it's possible to not look at the screen once. Because looking at the screen is just like, when you look at the screen, you think about the music you're making, but then if you're not looking at the screen, you feel the music you're making. And I just think that's like so important that we need more tools like that in our lives.
Yeah. Well, I mean, all you have to deal with is curly bangs at this point. But when you get to my age and you're like, every time you look at the screen, you're like, reading glasses are going up and down. And then, I've actually noticed that the looking up and down as part of my workflow that I must have taken for granted for decades, it can make me dizzy these days. So like, it's actually, it becomes more and more important to find ways to work where you're just like, you can kind of stay in the zone. So I completely appreciate what you're saying about being able to work. And recently I've been diving also into the machine micro from Native Instruments and like figuring out how to program stuff in there, and same thing, just stay right there on the controller. And it's a lot of fun, and I think it is, I agree with you. It's really important, especially for the getting started part, to just not have to go into engineer brain too much.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, let's see. What else do you want to tell us about Ableton? Anything else? Any other features that are really cool? Oh, I know one that actually, when I first learned about it, that blew me away, which was, if you're messing around and you're like, oh, that's so cool, I should go record that. Ableton was secretly recording it for you, and all you have to do is like hit a button and it sort of just captured it, right?
Yeah, the MIDI history.
Yeah, that's what it's called, right? So
it's called something else, but I know what you mean. Yeah.
Do you ever use that? Are there things about it where you ever use that feature that it sort of already grabbed your good idea?
I think the way I kind of write into it, I kind of just have record on all the time, so it hasn't come in super handy for me. But I've definitely used it a few times, and it's awesome. It just depends on the way you write, I guess.
What does that mean when you say I have record on all the time? Can you describe a little bit of let's say, somebody walked in and they're like, I got this good idea for a song.
Yeah.
And you get going. What does that mean?
Yeah, I guess it's more just like if I know I'm going to be playing anything, I'll have record on from the start. Just
and are we talking
because
about like MIDI track record, or are we talking about audio record?
probably MIDI more so than audio. Audio I feel like is a little creepy if I'm just recording all the time.
Right.
But but I'm not averse to the old practice take being the real take. That's come up a few times.
Yeah.
But yeah, certainly for MIDI because everything is just so manipulatable with Ableton. I do just kind of like to have it run all the time, and if there is a moment in there, I've got it. So I don't need the history button, but I appreciate that it's there.
So in other words, like if you start with a loop or a beat, maybe that's playing off of a clip, and it's just repeating over and over again. But then on an arrangement track, you sort of go into a record, and you can try your bass line ideas and your keyboard ideas, and you're just getting all of it. And then what would be a next move for you? Would you go back into what you just played, and there's like a clever way to just grab a bar and convert that into the clip that's now looped or something like that?
Yeah. It's so quick and easy. I think it's muscle memory by this point, so I can't even remember how I do it exactly. But yeah, you go back in, pretty much just stop. I think I record everything into a long clip. You can quickly zoom in, do a loop. The loop then becomes the loop that you make becomes the clip that plays when you play the clip next time, and then you can just start slowly building the arrangement from there.
Oh, clever. So it's like if you're playing a keyboard part and you're finding what you like, it's actually recording into a super long clip, and then you just truncate that down inside the clip. You just truncate that down to like, I like this bar, and now that's the clip. And so you haven't even like filled up your arrangement view.
Yeah. Arrangement view comes like arrangement view for me is normally after maybe a couple hours of getting all the clips that I want organized, or however long it takes.
Are you recording your own music or other people's music in your studio, but you're having trouble figuring out how to get your mixes to sound great? Do they sound weak and distant or lack punch and clarity? Well, I've got a gift for you to help you take your mixes from sounding like basement demos to sounding a lot more like professional mixes. And it's my free course called Mix Master Bundle. This course will show you how to get pro sounding mixes from your home studio with free and stock plugins in Pro Tools. And the best part is, these mixing techniques will work for you in any DAW, whether you're in Logic, Cubase, PreSonus Studio One, Reaper, or anything you can think of. Are you ready to make your best record ever? Then go to mixmasterbundle.com to get started for free now, and you can find the clickable link in the show notes of this episode. Okay, that's cool. These might sound like nerdy, weird questions, but like to me and my brain, you just clarified a process in a huge way. So I really appreciate that.
Of course. I'm sure there's a much clearer way I could say it as well.
No, it's very cool. Yeah. It's like, I mean, the way I like to think about music, I think about it sort of, I don't know, visually in my head. And now I understand it's like, you have to be able to just noodle, right? Or else you can't find something that's any good. But you don't want to make a mess when you're noodling. And so the fact that you can do that into this sort of container of a clip and then just isolate, okay, I like this part of the clip. So it's the same clip now, but now it's not a mess. Now it's just an organized
it's an
bar
organized
that
mess.
You want. And then you can go make a new clip, and now you can make a mess out of that. And then you edit that down into the one you want. So that's
the cool thing about Ableton then as well is when you're making your first mock-up arrangement, you can play the arrangement like an instrument as well. By launching all these clips, you're basically just like preparing them. You can quantize them to start on the bar. And even if you have a push or you have like a Novation controller or one of those ones with a lot of pads, you can, again, not look at the screen, just have it in front of you. You've got your labels, and you can just kind of play around with the arrangement until you find, cutting things in, putting things out makes you feel a certain way. You're like, oh, I like that. Let's make that the arrangement. So you can kind of just rehearse it all.
And it has a feature too where it's recording, like as you're playing these clips in different orders, it's actually recording that onto the arrangement track so that you can, when you hit it and you're like, oh, that was great, now that bit's on the arrangement.
Yeah, that's it.
And is this like an infinite number of universes where you're like, ooh, I don't want it to be on the arrangement. I want that to be in another clip.
I think at that point it's just however your brain works, really. Like that's the great thing about Ableton is that you can kind of do whatever with it.
Yeah.
So if infinite clips is your style, then that's great.
Cool, man. All right. Well, let's see here. Let me jump in on some other questions. So we'll stay on Hiatus Kaiyote for just a sec. These, well, I know you mastered it, so these might not be fair questions, but one of the things that was really remarkable about those records is really great dry lead vocals and these incredible vocal, soul vocal harmonics, harmony stacks that come in and out. And it occurred to me, it's like, they're super dry, or maybe they're not super dry. Maybe it's just like a very clever use of mixing effects that leaves you feeling that way. And some really killer bass parts too. And I was curious, if you had thoughts about vocal treatments, why and when to have very dry vocals versus affected vocals. And then also, do you think, were those basses, do you think they were an actual bass guitar, or is it like synth bass that's composed?
It's both. So yeah, with respect to Hiatus, I don't want to speak like fully on their behalf because I haven't. They do their own mixing and production and everything. But I can say that Nay, hugely talented singer, they're very dry, those vocals, or sometimes they're very wet with obvious effects. But I think the ones that you're talking about with the dry stacked up harmonies, bone dry, which is great. That's one of those things where, had they gone and given it to, a proper engineer instead of doing it themselves, it probably wouldn't have come out that way. But instead, it's this cool, quirky thing about it where it is in a vacuum and it's kind of cool.
It's funny, because like the first thing you do when you record is you have all your sounds are dry, and then you learn how to start adding effects to things, and then maybe you get really great at effects one day. But it's funny to think that one of the boldest moves you can do is to delete all the effects and just keep everything really, really dry.
Yeah.
Because if you make that choice as a mixer, that's a bold move. Like if you send it back to the artist and it was like, hey, I decided to keep everything completely bone dry.
Yeah.
It's a bold move.
It's a statement.
Decision. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think it's definitely, it's becoming, I would say it's like a little less in vogue than maybe it was 10, 20 years ago as well. It's like harder to come across now because so many people do self-produce and there are a million tools available to make your music sound like anything you want. And the first thing people do is get carried away with adding stacks of reverb on everything. So it's possibly even more of a statement now. But I love a good dry vocal, honestly, because I feel like you want to have some things to be completely dry, not always, because no rules in music, but to create a sense of depth, you definitely want something to be in the foreground and something to be in the background. And you can't get much more in the foreground than having no reverb at all.
Yeah, right. Because it sounds like they're literally in your face.
Yeah.
It's funny thinking about this concept of effects and layering and stacking. It also reminds me of the experience of building stuff up in a loop fashion. It's like you play around, you put down a kick and a snare, and then you put a hi-hat on, then you put a percussion on, then you do this, and then the next thing you know, you've got this mess of a sound where it's like there's way too much on it. At least I do when I'm playing around in that world. And sometimes I feel like you learn that maybe a good way to work is to build up the everything but the kitchen sink part of your song idea and then mute everything and now break it down. Those are your elements to start bringing in, in an EDM style production. And I guess you could think of effects that way too sometimes. It's like, way too much and then mute it all and now start rebuilding your arrangement.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting way to approach it. Yeah, I definitely do that with arrangements, but I haven't considered doing that with effects. So you've given me something to try out for next time. Great.
Yeah, I just this is what I do on the podcast. I just riff in my brain here live on the mic while we're talking. All right, so what about composing a beat for you? So as I'm diving more into composing and trying out Machine, building up a beat that way, or diving into Ableton Live, sometimes the first thing we're faced with is like, okay, well, what are we going to start with? What sounds do we start with? We probably, when we're starting out, we haven't built up our own amazing sample library that's perfect, beautifully organized. So the first thing we might be presented with, if I'm in Machine, for example, is like, what kit do you want to start with, So my question to you is, when you're thinking about starting a song, do you start with exploring the kits for drums, or do you tend to think in terms of like, I want this kind of kick, and you start with it, you go find the kick you want, and then you're like, I want this kind of snare, and you go find the snare you want? Is that a fair question to ask you about how you start when you're composing?
Yeah, I try not to have like one way to go about it. I don't know. I go back and forth. There was like a time when I definitely had my whole Ableton set up, so that I could quickly bash out an idea with a template. I had my samples all laid out. I had all of my, go-to instruments. I used to always start with drums. For some reason, drums came easier for me.
You just pre-answered another one of my questions.
Great. But no, I'm trying to like insert a bit of chaos into it these days, honestly. Because one thing I did notice from that time period is all my songs did start to sound a little the same, which maybe some people want. If you want to have a sound, that's a good thing. But for me, I constantly want to like explore new ideas and kind of develop how I make things, because it needs to be like new and fun for me. Like, it needs to be novel for me to continue to enjoy it. So I have less of a set process now, but I do have some fun tools that make it exciting still. A really good one I actually found maybe like 6 months ago. It's this little app called Synonym. It's a play off Synonym. And it is a machine learning powered sample library organizer where you can basically find, say, a snare or a kick or any sound really in the style that you want, and you can ask it to show you a bunch of samples like it. And you can apply this in any way. It's great. You can have a real live drum recording, and you can be like, I want to augment this snare with something. You can take a clip of your live recording, throw that in Synonym, and it'll show you your whatever is in your library that's like statistically the closest to it. And it's that's been a really fun way for me to work recently.
That's very cool.
It throws
I think I found it. I was trying to Google it at the same time here.
Yeah. Definitely check that out if you want to try a new process with drums and anything really.
Right. So it's helping you find within your own sample library similar sounds.
Yeah. But you could also, if you did have Machine, you could probably drag the Machine library in there or point it to the folder, so it would have all of those in there. So you have another way of sorting through that. Battery as well. I think I just gave it like every folder I have. So I do have like a pretty big personal library of samples, but then I also have all the factory stuff that you can let it decide what to do with. But,
that's cool. Yeah, I need to explore that for sure. I do find that I'm probably not at the point where I need to worry about finding my samples. I probably just need to make some music. But sometimes, you get to that point where you feel like you're doing the same thing, or I pull up a preset of a whole drum kit that like it, starts you with. And then I feel like it kind of points you in a direction where you're like, I don't know if I wanted to go in that direction. Like sometimes an aggressive kick sort of evokes a certain style of beat or something like that, where maybe you want something more mellow and muted. A lot of the cool sounds on your records too, there's a quality of there's a muted quality to instruments where they're treated and they're darkened, but yet like I love that combination of an instrument that sounds kind of dark and not overly bright, but it's somehow way in your face at the same time.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know where that came from, but yeah, that's definitely a tendency of mine. So glad you enjoy it.
There's another one that I discovered recently. I haven't played around with it yet. XLN Audio makes some really great plugins too. And the XO is their thing for sorting your samples by similarity, and it says explore infinite beats and kit variations. So I guess it like will take all your sample library and assemble new kits for you out of it as well, which is kind of a cool concept. All those things.
I think that one's good if you're more visual. I've used that
Okay.
one as
Oh,
well.
you've
I
used
ended up
that.
going
Okay,
with
cool.
yeah. I ended up leaning on Sononym a bit more, but
Cool.
it's the same process. It's cool.
Cool. Yeah. Looking at Sononym, I see Jamie Liddell's got a quote there, and he's been a guest on the show as well.
Great.
Cool, man. All right. Well, let me see here. So yeah, getting your sounds organized so that you can start with intention, I think is a cool way to do it. And then that was one of my questions is like, do you like to start with the instrument loop first or the drums? And I think you kind of answered that like you tended to start with the drums. And I tend to start there when I'm trying out Ableton or a loop thing or whatever. A first idea is like, okay, let me pull up a drum kit and do that. But then I agree, it causes you to kind of automatically go to a place. Because sometimes the best drums in a production are like super, super minimal, right? Hardly anything.
That's it, yeah. I think I definitely had a tendency to overcomplicate my drum patterns as a result. A big process of making a lot of those records when I was drums first was make a really cool drum groove that makes me feel something, build a whole song around it, and then realize at the end of the song it was way too complicated and delete half the notes.
Right.
And you could kind of just skip that step by not starting with the drums. Because I feel like you always, the first few things you do, you tend to like overcompensate a little bit because you want it to be exciting and engaging.
There's so much space at the beginning.
Yeah. Space everywhere. You feel like the human compulsion to fill it. But yeah, it doesn't have to be. But yeah, there's no right or wrong way. It's like whatever gets you to a great end result.
I just had this vision again of your Carriage studio. And one of the cool things about where the Carriage is it's on the rooftop. So when you look out the window, you're actually looking across a sea of rooftops, aren't you?
Yeah. Yeah. Straight to the city.
That's pretty cool, man. I like that.
It's cool.
That must have evoked some ideas. What sort of I know you weren't there for too terribly long before it was time to come over here, but what were some of the sounds that it naturally evoked in you when you were in such a unique space?
I don't know. Because I wasn't doing a lot of things from scratch at that time. I was kind of in a period of finishing records, so I don't think. Yeah, most of that has kind of been what people have done since they left. A lot of people have a great time creating music in there. It seems to be like their favorite thing to do in that space. But unfortunately, I have not been around to see any of it. But,
well, it's nice when you're mixing and mastering to have a view and look out at something too, and just sort of listen and look. My studio is wonderful and I absolutely love it. But when I'm looking forward, I'm staring at a giant television screen, because it's that classic sort of like big screen on the wall behind the speakers. So yet another reason why I prefer to be able to look down at the faders or, some sort of controller rather than forward at the screen.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah. Well, so tell us about what you set up in your studio now that you're in Philly. What is your studio like? What are you surrounded by?
Not a lot. I just moved
in the back.
No, no console. That's my bed.
Oh, right. I thought maybe it was like a BCM10 Neve console, and you just like put a bedspread over it to keep the dust off.
Just some pillows to make.
It's an actual bed. I love it.
Yeah, no, real bed. No, I haven't got that much yet. It's only been a year since I moved here, and it was a lot to get over here in the first place. So at the moment, I'm rocking some very good headphones that I love. These new Audisies, the LCD5s. Yeah. Be having a great time with them. I have my UAD set up. But mostly I tried to make it so that everything that I have is predominantly software so that I can spend this time traveling. So I can go to any other studio and have my whole setup with me. So that's been a big part of how I've set myself up now. So I mostly just have like instruments around me, but not a crazy mixing or mastering rig.
Yeah. So here's a fair question. So when I set up my studio, I've got all the stuff that I would typically want and need in front of me. And I set it up with an Argosy desk, for example, which is really great, but it's always amazing how quickly all the space gets filled up. Like even I redid my racks. And so now all of a sudden when I did my new studio, I was like, oh, look at all that open table space on the racks. And now it's all gone.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
have you, do you have any thoughts about showing up in other studios with your, the stuff you bring with you, and
Mm.
any requests to the studios of the world to make space for guests like yourself?
I think it's okay. I haven't had any serious issues. Usually just make do with where you are. What I've done is, I guess, like, I've molded the way I work around how the world already is, instead of asking the world to mold itself around me. So I
Right.
make it so that everything that I bring with me can ostensibly fit into one backpack, and then whatever combination of that backpack I can fit on the console or the table in front of me is how I end up working. So so far it's been good. I haven't had any times where I've wished I've had anything else. There's just like things that I have to think of. Like, I have to have like redundancies. I have to make sure I have really long cables, for instance,
Mm-hmm.
because you never know where the power strip is going to be, like the nearest power strip. So extension cables.
Bring your own power strip too, right?
Bring your own power strip. That's a big part of it. I've got one USB hub that everything goes into, that I try and keep it streamlined with. But
How about your
no.
laptop? Do you have a particular laptop that's living up to
Yeah.
all your needs?
Oh, it's been great. I'm on an M1, and the hype is real. Do you have an M1, M2, M3?
I just got a MacBook. I think it's an M2 Pro Max one.
Great.
And it's really awesome. And it's
That's
it's
so
just my
good.
laptop. So the reason I actually upgraded, because I tend to do this. I jump from ancient history to modern times, all at once.
Yeah.
So in my studio, I went from a 2010 Mac Pro cheese grater to a M1 Mac Mini, and it was like, whoa, this is
It's like
hugely
stepping
different.
into a new century. That's
Yeah,
awesome.
and then my laptop was a 2012 laptop. They were all running High Sierra, and then all of a sudden it's just like, whoa! Now it's a super fast one, and it's light, and the battery lasts forever,
Yeah. Yeah, it's
and
great.
and it'll only take me a year to break it. That's what I also learned about myself. I'll break anything.
Yeah,
And
I definitely find the limit of things. Like, no matter how good
yeah,
a computer I have, you always find a way to get to the edge. But
yeah.
well,
I
so
can't
far
wait
this
till.
one is like, yeah.
No, sorry, I just got a punchline. Is like, you get the new computer and you're like, I can't wait to make the new computer as slow as the old computer.
Yeah, yeah. Loaded
Uh,
with all the apps that you don't need. You only
Yeah,
open once a year.
inevitably it happens one day, right?
Yeah, yeah. No, I think I have like pretty good system around that as well now too. I have like a lot of cool apps that, for instance, like, you always had to be so temperature conscious. I know this is something that, like, no one really thinks about, but old MacBooks used to run so hot, and they used to
Yeah.
throttle sessions while you were mixing or producing. And so I got into the habit of having a little temperature app in the corner, so I know when my CPU is about to have to, not give me the juice that I require. But honestly, yeah, M1s are great. This is what I run now. I'm doing 96K mixes on it, and it just does it.
Wow.
Um,
I haven't gone back into 96K again. I did some sessions like that in the studio, and
mm,
then I realized I couldn't do all the mixing routing that I wanted, so I went back to 2448.
yeah, probably wise. But no, it's something I'm just exploring at the moment. I was like a particular record I was working on where I think I was doing too much internal oversampling on a lot of my distortion plugins and things, and
Yeah.
I made a 96K version, and all of a sudden, and turned all the oversampling off, and all of a sudden my top end came back, and I was like, well, let's see how far I can take it, and it held up. It was good.
Yeah, I think there's a good reason for that too. And it was I think the introduction to that whole concept came to me through an article that Craig Anderton wrote, and he's old school. He's been teaching us how to make records and build stuff and get things to work for a long, long time. But he pointed out that the when you get into plugins that regenerate distortion, or instruments plugins that are generating instruments sounds, they tend to because of the harmonic overtones, they tend to go way up, into the upper harmonics, and on the lower sample rates, those upper harmonics have fold back down into the sound range, and therefore have to be, filtered out. And so you really hear that effect. And so like when you do 96K, all of a sudden your sounds that are, your amp simulators and your distortions and stuff like that, they got a lot of room to breathe into those upper harmonics and not have it come back down into the audible range and kind of screw up the sound.
Yeah.
That's
yeah.
sort of my
it's
rough
definitely
way of saying it. You could beat me up in the audio forums over that one too if you want.
No, I think that was good. Yeah. It's definitely, I should say, it's very high up on Maslow's hierarchy of needs for audio. It's like something you should worry about after you've, gotten good at making a good song, mixing pretty good. It's not going to affect anyone's day-to-day life that much. But.
Well, the flip side to that topic is when you go back and listen to all your favorite records, how many of them were actually done at 96K, Yeah. You probably discovered that a majority of them didn't even know what that was.
Yeah, absolutely. I bet. In fact, there's a record that I grew up listening to that I don't know how it happened, but I can hear that there's 320 kilobyte MP3 drums only on the drums. It's like they must have had a corrupted hard drive or something. So yeah, and I still liked that record. So it wasn't at 96K, I presume.
That's awesome. Rock your music production with the updated Complete 15 bundle from Native Instruments, featuring the new Contact 8. This comprehensive collection includes a fantastic range of versatile synths, sampled instruments, and innovative studio effects, giving you everything you need to bring your music to life. Whether you're composing emotional scores, deep dance floor grooves, or experimenting with sound design, Complete 15 has you covered. Discover powerful plugins and instruments that guide you from the initial idea all the way through to the final mix. The included Contact 8 introduces exciting new tools like chords and phrases for instant inspiration, the Leap tool for dynamic looping, and Conflux, a cutting-edge hybrid instrument that merges organic and synth sounds in real time. Plus, enjoy revamped versions of Massive X and Guitar Rig 7 Pro to take your sound to the next level. Then polish your mixes off with the AI-enhanced Isotope Ozone 11 included in Complete 15 bundle. Use the code ROCK10 for 10% off at nativeinstruments.com. Howdy, Rockstars. We're back now for the jam session, aka the second half of the show. My guest today is Andrei Eremin, joining us from, Philly, because we couldn't catch him in time when he was still in Australia. So you ready to jam, dude?
Yeah, ready.
We talked a little bit about drums. What about bass? What are some sources that you really enjoy for creating bass in your productions?
Depends.
And how often is the real bass guitar?
It surprisingly often these days. I feel like maybe I'm just getting older, but I used to gravitate towards really low sub bass because it was this new cool exciting thing for me to explore. But I kind of love mid-range bass now. It becomes its own voice in a song. So I am using real bass a lot. I have a Fender Jazz bass, and I'm also I love that short scale neck pickup sound that was in Motown records, 60s records. I really want to get some more of that going in the future.
What comes to mind as a short example of a short scale bass?
Well, the most famous one is the violin bass, which
the Hofner?
Yeah, the Hofner, yeah. Which I don't know if people assume that sound comes from the violin, like the hollow body nature of it or anything, but I think it's actually the short scale, because I've played some long scale basses with a neck pickup. It's the combination of the short scale and the neck pickup being like right up on the neck instead of somewhere in the middle, like with your standard Fender basses. Mm-hmm. But a long scale with a neck pickup there doesn't seem to do the same thing as a short scale. It needs to be like further up on the as a percentage of the whole neck to get that really round tone that I love. So yeah, I'm going to explore that a bit in the future, but I don't know, there's a time and place for everything. Sometimes you get to the end of a track that you've only used real bass on, and like, it's just not hitting that extra level that I want, and layer a synth bass in, and away you go.
I think about that stuff all the time, and then I'm also like, no, it's just because your part is an octave up the neck too.
Yeah.
You cleverly, and in fact, I was just listening to another creator from Down Under, Tame Impala.
Mm.
And what's that? The big single from a couple albums ago or whatever. It's probably the biggest song out by Tame Impala. But that one starts out with that filtered bass tone and everything, and then the band drops in. And I realized as I was listening to that in the car that when the band kicks in, I think it's a synth bass part that doubles it underneath and fills out all the low end and everything.
Yeah, those records are really good like that. Everything comes from a surprising source, and you never really like. A lot of it will be drum samples and real drums. It could be full electronic, but you never really. It's all kind of blurred. You never really notice the difference. And again, I was just referencing Slow Rush, the last album, actually just yesterday, and a lot of it's synth based, but you wouldn't even think about it. It just feels great. Those records are really cool.
Did you happen to listen to the track Glimmer that was on there?
Probably. I'm really bad with names.
It's all right. I think it's track 11. It's like a short instrumental one. But you probably went right past you didn't notice it, but that was Recording Studio Rockstars was a sample in the beginning of the track.
Nice. That's so cool.
Yeah, it was quite a nice surprise. He sampled a clip of the show. And used that in the intro, and you kind of hear my voice in there too. But all I'm doing is going like, yeah, in the background.
Wow, I'll have to listen to it again.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So let's see. It's funny that you talk about that too, the short scale bass and shifting interest in the frequencies. I've talked about that a little on the show before about like going and typing in hip hop into a Spotify or something like that. And if it's modern hip hop, the low end is like way down in a certain area. And then if you type in old school hip hop, all of a sudden it sounds like the whole bass just leaps up an octave or something. It's like
car bass,
completely a different ways, different place.
Yep.
And so one of the records that that's in your discography, Remy, Hate You, it's got a great hip hop vibe. Reminds me of like Diggable Planets or something like that. I guess that's kind of the boom bap kick and bass. And then you got like high finger cymbals and other things in there too. So talk a little bit more about like finding the right balance for bass, the lows and the highs when you're producing, mixing, mastering, and how you arrive at a place where you're like, that's the right amount, for this record or this song. Do you have ways? I mean, you're moving around a lot, so I guess you got your headphones. I mean, I have a car. I love to do the car check and the car jam. What's your car jam as part of that process? How do you conclude that the low end and the high end is right in your records?
I honestly, most of the time, I don't have a car check anymore. I used to have one, like for instance, when I was back in the mastering studio where I, learned the ropes on. We had the couch check. Couch check was obviously where all the low end built up, and you could really analyze like how the different octaves were interacting with each other. I mean, usually just finding the corner of the room anywhere is just gonna give you a better idea.
That was a deluxe mastering.
Yeah, which was a really great sounding place, immaculately designed, and the subwoofers used to go down to 18 hertz there, so you could hear everything.
Well, it's cool to hear you say that too. I'm certainly familiar with moving around the room, and I used to do that all the time. And then we redesigned my studio. I did this Carl Tatz room, and so now it's accurate, which is nice to make records up in the sweet spot. But of course, in the sweet spot, I don't get that, the booming bass that is, I think sometimes what we like about the car is that it is sort of over the top,
Yeah. You know what? I mean, I still have my AirPods. I think that is a big check that I do depending on what kind of record it is. And especially the AirPods Maxes. You can tell they kind of weighted those in a way to sound really hi-fi and recessed in the upper mid. So you hear lots of bass in those. So you can usually use some combination of those to get a good gauge. But man, like these new Odysseys, like I have a really good feeling about how the low end interacts on them. It's great. It's a joy to listen to.
Yeah. What was the model of your Odysseys again?
LCD fives. Here they are. But yeah, and I do have one nifty little impulse response I did of the of Carriage before I left Australia, and that's come out very bassy. So every now and then, if I want to get the club picture, I use that. But
Oh, you
really
did
just yeah,
you did this the impulse response of the studio of the
yeah,
Carriage studio, so you can put on your headphones and it'll sound like you're back in the Carriage when you're listening.
yeah.
Oh,
Take me
that's a
back there.
trip.
Yeah.
That's a cool idea.
It actually is a trip. There's one I did of I had like a single NS10 that I used for my mid-range checks and my mono checks that is off in the corner. And if I put the impulse response on of that single speaker on my headphones, it actually breaks my brain a little bit and makes me think I'm back there. So
That's a trip.
yeah.
That's a trip. So I guess that what's cool to hear you talk about this is that a takeaway might be that if you're in a studio, even if you're in a space where you know it's designed really well for the sweet spot, then rather than think, oh, well, everywhere else and in the back at the couch in the corners, don't judge anything there because it's obviously broken. You're suggesting that you can actually train your brain to say, like, okay, in this broken perspective of the corner, a particular part of this mix is super exaggerated. So, if it doesn't sound right to me here, then my takeaway could be something's wrong.
Yeah. I don't even know if you necessarily have to train your brain that way, because I think it's more of a feeling thing. Because realistically, when you're listening to a record anywhere, unless you're in AirPods, you're in a less than ideal environment. And I find having that kind of situation takes your analytical brain out of it and lets you kind of just experience it as music again. And I think that's really helpful for judging those sorts of like low end, high end balances. And if anything's actually pretty wrong. The sweet spots for thinking and everywhere else is for feeling, something like that. But
let's leap over to the high end a little bit more. So are there certain situations where you find it's easier to catch problems in the high end? So if I think of problems, if I think of rock records, it's like it's too ear piercing. If I think of vocals, I think, oh, it's too much sibilance. If I think of electronic stuff, sometimes electronic stuff can have a just too much quality in the highs because it's electronically created. It's sort of these impossible sounds.
yeah.
Sometimes. Do you find that like AirPods or earbuds are a good place to catch those things? Cars, maybe
Definitely not
Odyssey
cars.
headphones.
Yeah, headphones I think are good because they're going to give you the most precise like top end with nothing else interfering with it. Because top end's obviously the most susceptible to change in whatever room you're in. So I definitely find, I mean, that's why a lot of mastering engineers will do like QC checks on headphones just to pick up any of those noises that might have come through that
Right.
you wouldn't otherwise hear in the room, even in the most well-tuned system. It's a thing. So yeah, definitely headphones is a good place to do that. And then otherwise, I don't know if I have any great actionable advice. I think in general, I'm like, I start by over taming the top end. And I feel like towards the end of a record, I have to like push it back up again to the point where it's like, it's on the edge of being too much, but it's not quite there. You still have a good feeling of the mix. But yeah, because on records are bright,
That's an interesting question. Like, do we find too much top end that's sort of filtered back out more appealing, or do we find dark sounds where the high end is boosted back up to be more appealing? I don't know.
Totally.
But they can both be cool. I think about like rock records and learning that, crashing on the cymbals, you're gonna be happy you used ribbon mics to record the drums on that one afterwards. But then like, I don't know, a jazz album or something where maybe there's very dark drums, or maybe the drums are mallets. You might be really, really patting yourself on the back that you use those high detail condenser mics when you recorded them, doing the contrast.
Totally. Yeah. It's all context dependent.
So let me jump into some of the records, more questions about sounds and things. So Iron Hand by Klo. I don't know how do you pronounce that.
Oh,
Kll.
Klo, yes.
Klo. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. One of those starts out with a cool sort of piano loop treatment. You know, it's got a little bit of broken tape underwater qualities and things like that. And that's something that, you know, it's probably been around for a while, you know, sound treatments, but it's really taken off with the world of computer productions and people having all these sort of mangling options, you know, and it's like, you know, maybe it's also because so much loop-based music that it's like, well, where's the room for the expression? And maybe the expression you find in your treatments of those loop-based sounds. What are your thoughts on all that and making music in this kind of loop world and treating sounds? And then what are some of your fun go-to plugins for just taking sounds from plain to warped and treated sounding?
Totally. Yeah. I find it really interesting because I feel like so much of it is like a reaction against modern technology, modern audio and music technology getting so good. Because there's only a few ways that everyone has the same ideal of how good music can sound. And it's pretty much within everyone's reach now. So a lot of the mangling is how you have, you know, the kind of individual expression that just kind of happened by technology not being good enough like 30 years ago, 40 years ago when everyone was on tape and consoles.
Yeah. I think about Bill Schnee when he was on the podcast, he talked about the immense efforts he had to go through to create a studio that was super hi-fi to record all those records. And now it's like you're saying, like when you just get an Apollo and a laptop or, you know, whatever interface you want to use, you know, or like, you know, Grace Design. I've just got the M108, you know, high fidelity is well within reach, you know, one good mic, one good cable straight into an interface and you've got hi-fi.
That's it. Yeah. And yeah, I'm kind of into it. This whole movement of people just like destroying things. Like a really good example when people started doing lo-fi house 10 years ago, that was really fun. Just like sending house tracks out to cassette and then playing it through the car and then recording it with a mic and then releasing that. Because
you got to turn us on to some of the artists that you think of for that. I mean, because I think of the Chemical Brothers were also doing that, you know, in the late 90s, early 2000s, you know, like the sound of cassettes and stuff.
It's great. Yeah. A lot of those early Aphex Twin records were cassette as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
But no, if I had to pick one for lo-fi house, Ross from Friends is a really great DJ producer, and he had this one record. It was like a 3-track EP.
That's the artist name, Russ from Friends.
Yeah,
isn't that the character in the TV show Friends?
Yeah.
Russ? Okay, great.
Yeah. It's great.
iZotope is truly amazing for mixing and mastering your music. Like the new iZotope Plasma plugin, featuring flux saturation, which helps you sculpt the harmonics in your sound, enhancing the excitement and clarity of your tracks and mixes. And Ozone, with its built-in mastering assistant, helps you analyze your mix, suggesting all the settings you need for a professionally mastered result based on your chosen style of music and EQ curve, or reference a specific song if you want. Ozone features sophisticated yet simple modules like clarity and impact, low-end focus, stabilizer, imager, exciter, and spectral shaping, along with powerful dynamic EQ, compression, and limiting, allowing you to adjust the settings to your taste so it sounds incredible. And with the magic of master rebalance, you can even manipulate the vocal, bass, and drums separately at the mastering stage. Use the code ROCK10 to get 10% off Plasma, Ozone, RX, or any of the fantastic plugins at iZotope.com.
But actually incredible record. And yeah, I can't think of it off the top of my head, so I'll have to link it to you. But yeah, great vibes. As far as like plugins that I like, I really like the Waves Factory cassette. If you know that one. That one's really good.
Waves Factory cassette. No, I haven't tried that yet.
Yeah, I think that one's really fun. There's a lot of room to tweak it down however you want. Lossy from Good Hertz is another one, doing this kind of like the whole FFT MP3 sound so that everything sounds underwater. It's actually, I'm really excited that they just came out with a pedal with Chase Bliss. I don't know if you've seen that one. It's lossy in a pedal, and there was a record I was making over the pandemic where I was putting lossy into guitar amps all the time. I was having a great time. There's something about it is a really cool effect. It just kind of takes away, well, it takes away like a lot of the frequency content, and then you kind of just left with these mid-range things that poke through, and through an amp,
Right.
it sounds awesome. You gotta
Bringing
try
back
it.
the dynamic mics.
Yeah. Um, and then what else? I mean, I have Cubase open in front of me. I could probably see if I have anything.
Yeah, if you feel like it,
else
I
that I've
mean,
been
you know, we
using.
can keep riffing on it.
Yeah.
I don't ask me the same question because I'm like, man, I can't remember what the name of that plugin was, you know.
Yeah, yeah.
But um, Sketch Cassette is another one that we learned about from Colin Dupuis, and I got
Yeah.
that and love it. It's really fun to mess up sounds, and it's fun to go through that process. Do you find that messing up sounds is something you tend towards at the creation stage or tend more towards at the mixing stage?
Definitely the creation stage, because I don't know, it depends on the project. I feel like there's two kind of mixing projects these days. There's the ones where you make it loud and clear and basically hold a mirror up to the production. And then there's the ones where you have a lot of creative control and you mix back in the way that, you used to mix the record. If I were to intentionally fuck anything up in the mirror kind of a mix, I would just be thrown out of the room. So there's not really a lot of room for creativity in those situations.
Yeah.
But if I have a good working relationship with someone, we definitely explore those sorts of things in the mix. But really, I think it does just have to happen earlier on in the process now, and especially as well. Like I feel like a lot of modern records don't really need it, just because again, like we have all these incredible tools at our fingertips, and everyone uses them. You feel compelled to use them
Right.
because
So they're
the world's your
coming to
oyster.
you with lots of
They're coming to me
character
with
and
like so
personality.
much, exactly, like so much more processing than was ever possible in the entire history of recorded music has already been applied to most of the songs that come through.
And do
So
you find that artists are sending you tracks with 10 plugins already on them, or they've committed sounds and it's sort of baked into loops, and then there might just be a little bit of plugins in the mix when it comes to you?
it's a bit of both. Yeah, I get all sorts. The hardest ones are when there's 10 plugins on the mix bus, because
Yeah.
then you
'Cause
have to try and
where do
make
you,
a
in the words of Spinal Tap, where do you go from there?
exactly. I have to try and find a way to
11. How
breathe
do you
some
get to
life back
11?
in. Yeah.
Okay, so let's see. Here's another one. Tash Sultana's You People Freak Me Out.
Mm.
That track sounds great as well. And it sort of starts out with this, you know, flying around filtered intro and stuff, and then goes into the music. And it just reminded me, again, sort of the question we were talking about before about controllers. It's like when you want to be expressive and you want to perform like a filter on opening up for a sound in the beginning of a mix, do you find that that's a mouse move and automation that's drawn onto a screen? Or do you find that, again, having controllers where you grab something and you turn it, or you push a fader, or like sweep your hand across an XY pad is the way to go for that sort of thing?
Yeah. I mean, I end up drawing all of mine, but I don't know if that's the right way to do it because I may just not have really great knobs for it. Like at the moment, I'm using a little Akai MPK MIDI, but I've had my eyes on those SSL controllers for a while. I bet automating a filter up on that feels great, you know?
Oh, you mean on the UC1, for example?
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
It is great.
Um,
I haven't used it so much for automation, but for just using EQs and carving stuff, God, I love it.
yeah, amazing. No, I really want to try that out. Whereas these ones, yeah, I feel you have to have like a certain degree of tactility with whatever controller you're using for it to feel like you can trust whatever automation you draw in. So yeah, for me it's usually the trial and error of draw a line on the screen, listen to it, feel it out. Oh, that line's wrong. Let's add some dots there and there, and
Yeah.
you just kind of get there eventually.
Yeah.
Eventually. Yeah.
Well, you're absolutely right. I mean, having a controller to do it is great, but again, the controller has to be working pretty seamlessly, because if it's in the least bit glitchy, then you're likely to just get frustrated and pissed off because,
Yeah.
it's like I just took my laptop out to the car recently and I was like, oh, let me try, now that I have a laptop that really works, let me put it onto the Bluetooth so it talks to the car stereo. And, like finally, if I wanted to, maybe I can compose some stuff or get a starter mix right off the laptop in the car.
Yeah.
And once again, it's like even just that latency of the Bluetooth means that if you do a move on the computer, it's a moment later that you hear the move out of the speakers. And that can really throw you off, You really
It
need
really has to be
immediacy,
dialed in. Yeah.
You know?
I find the same thing with like MIDI controllers as well, like keyboard controllers. If the ones with no feel, just kind of don't really do it for me. I have to have ones with good feel. You have to have like that kind of that feedback response. And having any sort of delay or anything like that, it's not really conducive to the greatest feeling fade or whatever move you're pulling.
So your understanding of what feels good for music, I assume, comes from playing real instruments as well. So we didn't even go there yet. So tell us a little bit about your instruments that you play and you as the musician.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I kind of grew up with music around me all my life. I feel like maybe the odd thing out is I actually did start on the computer first. I was a computer baby. So from like 7, I was using Cubase before I actually touched any real instrument. But obviously I found a fascination with it, and then I did start to play real instruments. So I was piano from 12, guitar from 14. Always wanted to do guitar, but piano or cello was what ended up coming first. And then bass guitar, I played double bass as well. I did both jazz and classical. So
you know your way around a staff paper and all that musical
slowly,
notation.
but yes, yeah. I couldn't sight read more than a monophonic part, but yeah, I could get around it if I needed to. But yeah,
what about
definitely.
Drums? Do you dabble in? Do you get into the drum kit too?
I didn't dabble with the drum kit. I was really bad at. I think this is a running theme with all the instruments I play. A lot better at monophonics, worse at polyphonics, and when I played drums, having independent limbs did not come to me naturally at all. Could not do it. So yeah, I kind of got scared off a little bit, but thankfully I have the Akai pads now. So I
and do
can
you
get halfway
ever
there.
do you sort of level up your pad drumming and get into the kind of the finger drumming stuff, or is it more like simple grooves and add one part at a time you find useful?
No, I definitely do finger drumming. Yeah, I try to add all of it at once and then just like build on what's there. But yeah, it is its whole own little beast. I went through phases where I was doing like exercises, so I could have like at least some intentionality on where I'm placing my hits. But yeah, it is a kind of its own instrument.
All right, cool. So Charlie Lim, Zero Sum, another great record in your discography. The opening part reminds me of like Jeff Buckley or something like that. Some great singing. I don't know if you're familiar with Jeff.
Of course.
Yeah. Who tragically was lost not too far from Nashville. He was in Memphis. Lost in the Mississippi was the end of his time. And when I was thinking of reminding me of Jeff, I just sort of typed that in. I was reminded of that on Google. Talk a little bit about male vocals versus female vocals and what kind of things, how is that? Do you find that there are significant differences for you in composition, arrangement, mixing, or do you find it doesn't really matter? It's just vocals are vocals, and
I just think it does just change so much. Like you can have male vocals who belt, male vocalists who whisper. You can have with females as well. I think like maybe that's the biggest distinction. It's like belting versus head voice or having like a whispery airy quality. That'll change how you approach it in a mix, but two different people belting kind of fulfills the same purpose. But really interesting development, especially now with modern recording technology at home. I find it fascinating that most bands now lean toward the whispery, airy vocal, just because they're quiet. They're recording quietly in a shared house probably.
Yep.
And so that's
Yeah,
just the way
they
the
were
music's
stuck
kind
at
of
home, and
developed.
that's all they could do was record something quietly in the room.
Yeah, exactly. It's just crazy how that's like totally changed the trajectory of how even like bands sound now. And yeah, that's really fascinating to me.
Yeah, and I think another fascinating thing about that is what is the natural delay between why something takes a stylistic turn and how and when you hear it and when it influences other things, you know?
Yeah, it's definitely getting to that kind of feedback point now where I'm sure people aren't even consciously thinking about not disturbing their neighbors. It's just their favorite band sounds like that. So that's how they
Right.
sing. It's great.
Yeah, that's interesting. And then what about you? What do you feel like were some of the musical influences for you? And do you ever think about the stuff that you love musically, how it came into being, you know, a half generation before you, and therefore
Mm.
influenced your music? Your
Yeah,
taste?
all the time. I think that's, I definitely wish I was making music around the time when my favorite records were made because it just sounds like, I don't know. I feel like I grew up around a time when albums really meant a lot, like creating this big singular piece of work was like, at least those were my favorite records. And I feel like you have less of an opportunity now with Spotify and the way that, streaming services reward constant songs and everything. So
Hmm.
yeah, definitely there's a part of that process that I miss. But yeah, I mean, I grew up on like, my favorite records were from like the Mars Volta or like Kendrick's got some really great albums as well. More recent one, Frank Ocean, Blonde is like a really influential album for me. But I just really like those kind of special albums. I don't know how else to put it. Just like something magical went in there, a lot of time, a lot of effort, a lot of experimentation, and covers a lot of ground, has like a singular narrative. And yeah, those records are always really fun to me. They kind of like elevate the medium a bit. So I try and bring a little bit of that energy into the records I make.
I
Um,
remember hearing about Mars Volta for the first time as a sort of a young upcoming artist that Rick Rubin was interested in, and he when he talked about it, it was like I'm just putting him into a studio to let him experiment and mess around.
yeah, I love
And then
that.
hearing you describe it, it's like I guess that's what worked. That's what happened. I don't know the exact order of things, but I remember first hearing about them probably 2000s, early 2000s
Yeah,
or something like that.
that was the time.
Do you feel like the time that you've spent watching YouTube videos, trying out mix tricks, and tweaking version after version of your mixes has gotten you nowhere? Have you been looking for more of a simple and straightforward step-by-step process for creating a pro mix that won't take years to learn? What if you could have a Grammy-winning mix engineer who understood all of your struggles and could coach you through them? If you struggle with any of these questions, then the Ultimate Mixing Masterclass is just for you. Now you can discover the proven step-by-step mixing system from Grammy-winning mix engineer Craig Alvin for consistently creating a pro-quality mix in your home studio that will sound great everywhere. Listen to this quote from one of our students, David. That was absolutely the most helpful and informative block of information and mentoring on the mixing process that I have ever been a part of. That was like sitting behind a mix engineer for years, watching and picking up pro tips along the way, condensed into a 6 to 7 hour session. Look, I'm so confident that this will help you take your mixes to the next level, that if you can't get a killer mix in 30 days, I'll give you a refund, no questions asked. So if you're ready to take your mixes to Grammy-winning quality, then go to ultimatemixingmasterclass.com and start now by checking out the free preview of the Ultimate Snare Mixing Trick. And hopefully I'll see you in the front row of the Grammys. Yeah. Okay, cool. So then let's talk about something, this one's sort of a little bit mixing related. Fractures Won't Win. Another one with great sounds in it. And it starts out with cool sort of synth keys. Like it sounds like this is one that maybe started with the loop and then the drums come in and join in a moment later. And it's got that quality of dark. It's a dark sort of synthy, murky key sound. But it still sounds like way up in your face somehow. So I wondered if you wanted to talk about the arriving at that quality of like, how can we take some simple key arrangement sounds and by, some chord arrangements and make them sound exciting, even if but maintain that sort of dark, murky, mysterious quality at the same time.
Yeah, I don't know if I have a good answer to that, especially because I also have a bad audio memory. So
It's all
I
right.
know the song by name and by record, but I can't tell you what it sounds
It's all right.
like.
I mean, yeah, that's fair. I mean, I feel that's true for anybody. So I don't mean to ever put anybody on the spot about like, name dropping. It's like, what did you do on that one Tuesday at 3 p.m. when you did
Yeah,
that
yeah.
thing, But like, what about using, when somebody sends you a keyboard sound and you're mixing and it's like
Mm.
a little underwhelming and you're like, it's a cool part, but it just sounds sort of like way back and I need to bring it to the foreground. Is it like, do you find like saturation and like, various gain limiting compression plugins and treatments to be really useful for that stuff? Is it parallel treatments that are sometimes helpful?
Parallel can be helpful. I don't know. I definitely like the older I get, the more I'm kind of leaning to the really basic things that people have been doing for 50 years. I
Yeah.
wish there was like some magical spectral processor that just like took everything and put it. I mean, they do take everything and put it up in your face, but that's a sound of its own, and it's not necessarily the right sound all the time. But I think like I don't know, for keyboard specifically, if it's not sitting right, it's either the EQ of the synth, like maybe you have to take out some mids or put some mids back in, whatever have you. There'll be something about it that's like the character of it isn't right. And then I also find it's like contextual. It's like what else is going on that might be masking it or not letting it kind of shine through in the song. I find that how it comes up a lot. It's like to mix an individual part really well, you kind of have to mix everything else so that it has like the freedom to be really good or something like that.
It's like you have to give it the foundation, even if the foundation is space.
Yeah, absolutely. Because otherwise everything just kind of blurs into one anyway. So yeah, I guess maybe if you had to narrow it down to like how to get something up front is just like make space for it. Really. Yeah.
Another album, Willow Beats Special.
Mm.
I made a note that it just had a great like kick and bass combination too. And it makes me want to ask you to go back to the topic of bass a little bit. Sometimes you have a bass part, and again, you want to keep things sort of like the sounds are all great and it's all, you want to, be super minimal in what you do, but sometimes the bass just needs something extra to make it sort of fill in that whole low end and sustain and all those things. So what are some tricks that you can go to for that, to really make the bass feel full in a mix? I mean, do you split, frequency splits and various compression tricks? And, is that a place where parallel treatments on low end can really bring out the bass part?
I only have like one trick, but I think it's funny. I feel like I'm giving like cop out answers to everything, but
No, it's all right.
bass in particular is like another one where the best thing you can do is, at least with electronic bass, just leave it alone.
Right.
The best thing you can do is get a really good sample. And if you get your dynamic envelope, like your attack sustain right in the sample, and it's played, to the velocity that you want, then that's kind of it. You got it right. That's as clean and as full and forward as it's ever going to sound. And like whatever you stack on top of that is just going to kind of take away from that. But an important one is like harmonics. I think that is something you have to have tricks for, because bass goes so low these days, especially with samples, and you need to be able to make sure that the point of the song, if it's foundational to the song, can carry across everywhere. So saturation is really important. I've done some cool things such as I actually find limiters. Using limiters as a distortion on bass is really cool, because limiters are kind of designed to have a softer sound. They'll have a rounder sound. Distortion will thin out a bass sound if it's used in the wrong way, but you can actually get a really good thick low sub that doesn't lose any of that kind of, good stuff if you use parallel limiting as your harmonic source. So that's been really cool.
So the limiting sounds a little distorted and it kind of adds distortion, but
yeah, but it'll add, depending on the limiter, it'll add odd harmonics and subtle odd harmonics. So you get just enough that it'll poke through on a laptop or a small system, but without messing with the sound of everything else. So yeah, that's a cool little trick.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of those things I remember discovering when you play around with a compressor. You discover that if you set your attack and release times too fast, on a compressor or on a limiter, a high compression ratio, on a low frequency instrument, you start to hear distortion on it. And it's like a cool discovery. Like, oh, listen to that.
Yeah.
So it's cool hearing you talk about it.
Yeah,
doing it in a way that's intentional can add a really cool distortion to it. And then the other thing is hearing you talk about like getting the sound right. What I love about electronic productions is, let me say it this way. When you're doing live instruments, there's a tendency, like there's a wildness and an unbridled quality to the dynamics that unless they're played like really masterfully, it feels like the effort in mixing goes into how do I make these feel more under control like a synth sound would, so you're trying to manipulate the dynamics to reel them in. But when you start out with great electronic sounds, they're already totally reined in. And you're saying it's the reverse is true. You're trying to not undo that because they've got the perfect, hopefully the perfect intention for what that low end is. And so, when you're mixing too, it seems like a lot of mixing is like, what is my foundation of low end and how does everything else relate to that, and mid-range and everything. And so like if you're starting with these sounds, as long as you get the sounds really great to begin with, a big chunk of the work is already done for you in the mix. Just don't screw it up.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, and I really do find it's like the more you try and compress your low end, if it's like 808s, if it's subs, if it's synth bass or whatever, it just kind of interferes with it a bit, especially when you get in with like, some of the wider polyphonic patches as well, and like unison patches. Like there's no amount of compression that's not just gonna, I don't know, break something in the process. So yeah, it's cool. It's cool because you can manipulate those sounds at the source, and I think that's a really powerful thing.
For 15 years, I had a famous MCI console at my studio that originally came from Criteria Studio C in Miami, where it made some of the most iconic Grammy-winning records of the 1970s, and it sounded incredible. When I was ready to upgrade my studio to a full digital mixing setup, I teamed up with Rick Carson at Make Believe Studio, Metric Halo, and Golden Ear producer Bill Simzik to recreate the legendary MCI console as the new MBSI plugin. The MBSI captures the same iconic sound used on multi-million selling records like Hotel California for the Eagles, Saturday Night Fever and Staying Alive for the Bee Gees, I Shot the Sheriff for Eric Clapton, We're an American Band for Grand Funk Railroad, and the soundtrack to Grease, the movie, all for legendary producers like Tom Dowd, Todd Rundgren, and Bill Simzik. The MBSI plugin not only delivers the authentic sound of the original MCI console faithfully, but it also adds new features like a top-notch compressor, overdrive, and a dual EQ filter switch, adding tools that Bill Simzik said he would have loved to have in the original console. Now you too can get that Grammy-winning MCI sound in your home studio. Whether you're recording or mixing, you can experience the sound of Miami 1976 with the MBSI plugin and soak up a little sunshine in your sound at makebelievestudio.com/MBSI. Now, do you think that it helps that you approach a lot of these questions without thinking about it because you've got a mastering engineer's ear? You're sort of thinking about it in the final context while you're working on it. And with that question, tell us a little bit about how you master stuff. When you do master a record, What are some of the things, the tools that you use and the way that you go about doing that that's different than, is it just mixing 2.0 or is it something different?
It can be, and you probably don't want it to be because it's it's a little late for Mix 2.0, but there's a time and place for everything. But no, I think I've been doing a deep dive into like really, really dialing in my mastering process recently. And again, it's the same kind of thing. There are all these tools that exist that, all these like spectral tools, FFT tools, multi-bands, things that people distort your mix, things like that. I think you just need EQ and a limiter, honestly. I do have a really great compressor as well. I'm a big fan of Unisum, if you know that one, the Tone Projects one.
No, not yet.
That's a really great one. But I mean, so for mastering in particular, I feel like so much of what I'm trying to do is not be able to hear that there's a ceiling. I'm creating this illusion that there's no ceiling to the mix, because if there's a ceiling, it just sounds a bit pushed, fatiguing, like unrewarding to listen to, not very musical. So I'm trying to be invisible. And really like a limiter that's clipping mostly is going to get me there. Unisum will also get me there if I do need to control the dynamics, because it has some pretty complicated stuff under the hood that means it's not just like grabbing a transient and flattening it. It's actually reacting to the music in a really cool way. And then EQ, you just have to kind of have a good intuition for what are the important parts of the song. What am I currently hearing too much of that's getting in the way of those important parts? Maybe it's the important parts that are too loud. You just have to have listened to a lot of music and have a really good idea of how music translates everywhere, and just kind of use your own intuition to make some choices there, some tonal choices, so that it feels as best as it possibly can be. But yeah, it's definitely a very different part of your brain to every other part of the process. So
what about monitors? Do you continue to use the same monitors, or do you find that switching that up is helpful?
I don't switch anymore. Maybe I would switch if I had lots of monitors, but I'm still headphones and using other people's studios at the moment. So no, I think consistency is good if you have it really dialed in. That's the caveat. If you don't have it really dialed in, as many monitors as you can find, because they'll all, well, maybe not as many. You'll probably reveal things that you don't need to be revealed, but it will reveal something. And I think it's important to like tackle all those edge cases. But yeah, definitely for an ideal mastering room, you kind of just want a really good set of speakers and to just know and trust them and not have to, like, I guess the most important thing for me is eliminating all the possible variables. I want to be able to just experience the music as a piece of music, having forgotten about how everything else, performs on the day.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's the foundation of being a good engineer and having good judgment, I think.
So now you're leaning on your Odyssey headphones a lot. So that's your portable monitoring, and
yeah,
when you're not in somebody else's studio.
Yep, that's it.
Did you start out when you decided to do that switch? Did you start out by just listening to a lot of records to just sort of train yourself to know what the new sound is in these headphones?
Yeah, when I get a new set of headphones, definitely. So I just got these this year, and the first thing I did was listen to all the music I grew up with, basically for a fortnight straight. Yeah. Just so you kind of get an idea of, well, I guess you stop hearing the headphones by that point, which is a little sad, because when you first hear them, it's really exciting. You like all these new things jump out at you for the first time. And eventually that kind of becomes wallpaper and you stop hearing what you're listening to, like what you're listening with.
Yeah.
But I think it's an important part of the step to, a part of the process to get to a point where you can make good decisions.
Do you find that just plugging those straight into the headphone jack on a laptop was sufficient for sort of training your ears, or did you decide that you really need to hear them through the same interface you're going to mix on and train yourself that
definitely
way?
The same interface. Yeah, it's again like another one of those control for all variables things. Same interface, you're going to lose some top end and you're going to have some noise floor and harmonic distortion in the headphone port on your MacBook that is just going to cloud your judgment. I think I did try at one point just because I was trying to sneak in a little bit of extra listening time, and I decided it just wasn't worth it and went back to my Apollo. But really, like any great headphone amp, just as long as it's separate from like if it's part of a cheap interface, they will have spent like $2 on the components of the headphone amp. So don't trust that. And same thing with a MacBook. Like they're not making audiophile quality conversion and amplification in there.
It's interesting to think that when we use the AirPod Pros or something to listen, we can pair them with the laptop. We're not even hearing the laptop. We're just actually hearing the amp that's built in, the battery powered amp built into the headphones.
Yeah.
That's our converter. But I mean, that is a sound, and that at least gives you 100% perspective on what everybody else is going to hear too. Which is
absolutely
cool about monitoring that way. All right, well, so let me go to a couple of quick questions. Actually, let me just go to this one, man. This is our hypothetical question. I like to ask this one of all my guests who come on the show. We're going to take the Wayback Studio machine, and you get to go back in time and find young Andrei and say, listen, dude, here's the single most important thing you need to know to be a rock star of the studio yourself one day. What advice would you like to go back and give yourself if you could? I mean, you made a lot of records. You've built a studio, you left it behind, you've moved countries, you had a lot of experiences.
Don't know. It was always hard to go back in time because you never get a second dice roll of the way you did things anyway. So it's hard to say what was like.
I love hearing you refer to it as if we're all going back in time every now and then, and we're like, it's so hard going back in time.
Yeah.
Every time I do it.
I mean, well, you never know what esoteric things I used to do as a kid were actually like put me on the right path, regardless of how off the path they were. So yeah. I don't know. I think like if I had to change one thing, I was just I tried very hard, and the music doesn't require you to try very hard if it's good. I definitely overcompensated. And I think everyone does. I think it's just like a learning process you have to go through, but just relax, just, be a good guy to hang out with, and don't think too hard about it because it's probably going to sound good either way. You don't have to process it to death or edit everything to death or, all of the things that you have the ability to do these days.
Did you go through the experience of micromanaging somebody else playing a part in the studio as a producer?
Yeah.
You're like guiding them to the point that every single note they play, you've commented on.
Yeah, definitely a little bit. I think I let the computer do a lot of the micromanaging as well, though. So trying to do less of that. But yeah. Okay. These days, like I'm usually, if it feels good, it is good. There's something to that.
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely went through that where somebody's playing and I was so excited about the ideas in my head. I had to say something about every note they did.
Yeah.
Until they were just worn out, wear them down to the bone.
Yeah.
And then you're like, why didn't I like the way that turned out?
It's a mystery.
So, Andrei, it's great to meet you, man. Thanks so much for coming on the podcast with us. A real pleasure. Rockstars, I want to remind you that we have the playlist in the show notes. So please scroll down and go listen to these awesome sounding records. Tons of them. They sound really good, and you're going to want to make cool sounding records after you do. How should the Rockstars go find out more about you? Do you have music, that you're putting out or anything, stuff that's coming up? What if they just want to get an amazing mix or master or production on their next album?
Yeah, it's all on my website, andreieremin.com. It's where I keep everything. A little out of date, but I have some time to prepare while the show airs. And yeah, you can find all my records I've worked on there. I have been working on some of my own new music, but nothing to show yet. So probably just follow me on Instagram or Twitter or something like that. And hopefully it'll come out soon. We'll see.
Awesome. Yeah, we got those links in the show notes as well, Rockstars. And then if you're down under and you need a cool studio, go check out the Carriage.
Carriage.studio is the website for that. But yeah, definitely check it out regardless, because it was really fun to put together, and it's a trip to look at. So
yeah, what's up with you guys making these really cool studios like Kevin Parker, Tame Impala? It's got that beach house studio. for the
Yeah.
record. And then you've got a Carriage studio.
I don't know what it is. I think Australia just has like a really vibrant culture in so many different ways. So people make really fun things. It's great.
Yeah. Awesome, dude. Well, thanks for joining us, Rockstars. Thanks for listening. And Andrei, I look forward to meeting you in person soon.
Sure. Thanks so much for having me. It's been great.
All right, man. Cheers.
All right. Catch ya.
Thanks so much for listening to Recording Studio Rockstars. If you enjoyed the show and want to help make it better, then please share this episode with your friends on social media and leave a rating and review on iTunes to help the podcast reach more rock stars like yourself. You can click directly over to iTunes or go to rsrockstars.com/review for an easy explanation. And remember to hit the subscribe button to keep up with weekly episodes. And if you're ready to make your best record ever now, then head over to Recording Studio Rockstars Academy, where you can start with my free course at mixmasterbundle.com. Thanks so much for listening, and thanks for being a rock star. I'm Lid Shaw, and this is Recording Studio Rockstars. Now, go make great music. Recording Studio Rockstars would like to give a big thank you to our awesome sponsors who help make this episode possible. iZotope, Native Instruments, Roswell Pro Audio, and Atom Audio. And remember to take advantage of our special coupon codes. At iZotope.com and nativeinstruments.com, use the coupon code ROCK10 for 10% off any plugin. If you enjoyed Recording Studio Rockstars, please check out our sponsors using the links in our show notes. These are all things that I highly recommend for your studio because they're going to help you make your best record ever. Also, like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. This is new for us here, and it's a great way for you to help support this show, so I greatly appreciate it. I would also like to thank our fantastic team here at Recording Studio Rockstars, Vlad Weselchenko and Liz Hulitskaya. Thanks so much for watching and for listening. My name is Lid Shaw, and I'll see you in the next episode. Cheers.